Hello, everybody, and welcome in to another episode of New England Sports Weekly. As always, I am your host, Sean Metcalf, and I am glad that you've decided to join me this evening. If you were listening live to the episode on YouTube, as you can always do every Wednesday night, stream the episodes at 8 p.m. and usually go about an hour or so here, or hour and a half, depending on how rowdy we get with the subjects that we're getting into. But it is a great evening here as it is the start of fall, and of course, along with fall comes football, as we'll get into dissecting week number 2 and the storylines that have come out of that, as well as get you prepared for week number 3 against Baltimore. Plenty of meat on that bone to chew on here, as it is going to be a fun packed show. Plenty to get to here, but anyways, I hope that you guys are all enjoying your evening, enjoying your morning, however you decided to take in this show. Just hope it's all is going well for you. And like always, we will start this sucker off with the out of the box segment, which we're still looking for one of you great sponsors out there to beef it up and bring a little bit more excitement to this here for the out of the box segment. Now, of course, we start off with the New England Patriots. They took down the Pittsburgh Steelers 17-14 in week number 2 of the NFL season. So they were able to even up their record and get back to 500 at 1-1 as they get ready to host the Baltimore Ravens for their home opener this Sunday at 1 p.m. So the Patriots finally getting back on track here. In the offense, as we'll talk about a little bit, we'll talk about here a lot in just a moment, got off a little bit better than they did last week. Still a lot to improve on here, but there were signs of life, signs of improvement for this team moving forward. Now, of course, looking at some of the other things swirling around this team, as the other news that broke today was that the Patriots did make a trade of offensive tackle Justin Herron. Is going to the Las Vegas Raiders, and the Raiders will get a late round pick, and the Patriots will get a 2024 sixth round selection. So Justin Herron, who has been more of a backup tackle, he's played a little bit of guard, but mostly tackle. He's going out to Vegas and going to be reunited with Josh McDaniels out there. And of course, the other big news for the Patriots was Jacoby Myers was a DNP. For those of you not in the know, DNP stands for did not practice. So he was out today with an issue on his knee, but the reports have come back that it was nothing serious for Jacoby Myers. So that will be interesting to see how that goes for Jacoby, as he did have a nice bounce back week last week against the Steelers, having 95 receiving yards and was pretty good at moving the chains there for the Patriots, just like he always is. So it'll be interesting to see how this really affects Jacoby Myers, because they're going to need him big time in this matchup against the Ravens. Now, of course, the Patriots will be taking on Baltimore, who lost a big matchup to the Miami Dolphins. Well, what didn't start out as what should be a big matchup, but they ended up losing 43-38. They lost in a embarrassing fashion. They went into the fourth quarter up. When I turned it on, it was 28-14, or no, sorry, 35-14 at the time, and it looked like a blowout. And then all of a sudden, the Miami Dolphins had to come back for the ages and ended up beating Baltimore. So that'll be interesting to see how that all unfolds here for the Patriots and Ravens game. And of course, outside of football news here, going over to the Boston Garden, there was a report that in the last couple of days, it came out yesterday, that Robert Williams III, or some of you may know him as Time Lord, will be out for 4 to 6 weeks to start the season. So again, issues with his knee are going to be cropping up again this season. So he's the last couple of years it's been hard for him to stay healthy. But we all know when he's out there, when he's healthy, he's one of the best defensive centers in the league. Of course, we know he can get points in the paint for you as well. So we'll see how that all works out for the Celtics this year. Of course, they were counting on him coming back and being healthy. Now it's just I mean, it wasn't really going to change much as far as from the standpoint of make sure that he was healthy for the playoff stretch. But of course, now even more so that he's going to miss 4 to 6 weeks, that you're going to really make sure that that home stretch and ready for the playoffs, that you have Robert Williams ready to go for the Celtics. And then, of course, in Bruins news, a former Bruin for, oh boy, what was it? 14 years, 15, 16 for he was here for a long time, spent obviously the bulk of his career with the Boston Bruins. And that would be the captain, Big Z himself, Zdeno Chara, has announced his retirement after 24 seasons in the NHL and 25 in professional hockey. So he is officially hanging them up, and he will be calling it a career. As we mentioned, he was in his prime. He was one of the best defensive defensemen out there, and he retires after scoring 209 goals, 471 assists, and 680 points overall. Played in 1,680 career games. And as we mentioned, 14 years in the Boston Bruins organization. Remember, he was the big signing for Peter Chiarelli back in the 2006, 2007 offseason, or in the 2006 offseason, I should say, and played all the way until the end of the 2019-2020 season for the Boston Bruins. So it'll be very, very interesting to see how he ranks in the all-time Bruins category, because that defensive lineup for the Boston Bruins, with obviously Bobby Orr, the greatest defenseman of all time, Ray Bourque, who is a top 10 defenseman of all time, and of course you have Brad Park. The list goes on and on. But of course, he slots somewhere. He definitely is probably in your top 6 in there. He is, for the amount of time that he spent here. So he obviously is an all-time great for this organization. But again, that's a full locker room as far as defensemen is concerned for Boston. So it's a hard lineup to crack. But regardless, he was a rock for this organization, and he is hanging it up after 25 years in professional hockey and 24 years in the NHL. And then in Red Sox news, so it's been a full slate here of news. The Boston Red Sox, what was it, Monday or Sunday, ended up releasing Kevin Plawecki late night after one of their games, and the news was just a bombshell. Well, bombshell's a little bit too dramatic for a guy like Kevin Plawecki, who, don't get me wrong, I liked him. He was a good clubhouse guy, but of course, he was let go late at night. That did not bring up a lot of great emotions from his teammates, especially Nathan Eovaldi and of his like, who really have Kevin Plawecki as one of the leaders of this team. He's the guy that got the golf cart, but got the laundry cart started for home runs. It always seemed like he was keeping the clubhouse loose. You always hear teammates gush over him. He was a professional, a great guy, and the Red Sox decided to let him go. Now, of course, it was more for a business decision, for playing time for Connor Wong and their young catchers, and see maybe what Reese McGuire has, and see if maybe they want to bring him back as well. So it was more for this business-wise to get to see what you have at that catcher's position, and you're well out of the wild card race. And obviously, the division has been gone basically since day one, since Jump Street, and you really kind of have to see what you have for the future. Now, obviously on the surface, I don't mind it. I mean, whatever. It doesn't bother me. You let go of a catcher, but for me, it was more of the timing issue. I don't know why you didn't wait until after the game was over, and or maybe till the end of this season, because I mean, it's not. Honestly, outside of Connor, not that you couldn't have got Connor Wong time in this situation. I mean, you definitely could have. So I mean, I would have waited to the end of the season and said, "All right, here's your walking papers, you're going." But thank you for 2021 and all that you've done for this organization. But I thought it was a little odd on the timing wise. Business wise, I totally get it. This is one of the few moves that I'm not going to really bitch about with Hein Bloom. I think this is where the players kind of have to realize, just suck it up. You're in last place. You really don't have a leg to stand on here to bitch about, no matter how much you like the guy. How about you would have, if you played better, you would have had your one of your leaders and one of your defensive stalwarts behind the plate there. Yeah, he didn't have a great arm, but he could call a great game and was a good defensive catcher. But I'm not. That's something that if I'm the Red Sox, I'm not going to cry about. So that was the big news surrounding the Red Sox, as we all know that they're about ready to just pack their bags and head home for the offseason. And hopefully Hein Bloom is ready to actually put together a full competitive baseball team and not leave a bunch of holes in this team. So we'll definitely get into that later on in the show. Talk about that a little bit here. But of course, and as we mentioned off the top of the show, the main course here is going to be the Patriots. And of course, we will start things off with the Patriots and Steelers game. Now, for those of you who need a little bit of a recap, remember the Patriots lost to Miami 20-7 week one. So they needed to get off on the right foot and needed a good win over Pittsburgh. Now, of course, Pittsburgh themselves were coming off a overtime win that looked like they were going to get beat, 4 times in that game, but somehow they miraculously won that overtime game against the Cincinnati Bengals. So things were definitely a lot more encouraging. We talked about the first drive in the Miami game, and then everything fell apart after that. You really didn't get that feeling there in this particular game, except for a few instances where you're like, could this be the tipping point? Could this be it? But a Pittsburgh defense that lost TJ Watt for significant time, and really you're relying on Cam Hayward and Minka Fitzpatrick, but the rest of that Steelers defense, it's okay. It's not horrible, but it's when you don't have TJ Watt in there, then it really significantly changes this Steelers defense. And the offensive line all day long really, really did keep Mac Jones clean, gave him plenty of time in the pocket. So they made some decent holes for Damian Harris and Ramondre Stevenson in this game. So both of these running backs had pretty solid games all around. So it was all together to start the game off. You felt a lot better. Obviously, the one thing was an interception that Mac Jones tried to force into Devontae Parker, where it looked like Parker was going to burst up the seams, but it was a bad throw by Mac in this case. So that's the one thing that coming out of this game I wasn't as happy about, was with how Mac ended up looking in this game. Don't get me wrong, he was not horrible. I'm not ready to just all of a sudden just throw Mac overboard and be like, all right, we need to start over. This is unacceptable. Anything like that. I'm not ready to go to those extents here. But just being critical as far as what I saw out of Mac in that game, it just wasn't what you've come to expect from Mac, because you had his whole rookie season where he made the smart choices. Guys, you're going to throw interceptions. You're not going to have, how many of those guys have the Tom Brady in 2010 where he threw 2 interceptions the whole year? You had an Aaron Rodgers year a couple of years ago. I think it was 2020. Was it 2020 where he ended up throwing just 2 interceptions? So it's few and far between, as far as you have to be the elite of the elite to do that. So it's not, to me, it's not a total red flag, but having some picks. But obviously, it's like when you start getting into the high teens, the 20s in interceptions, where it's like, okay, it's becoming a problem here. But Mac Jones finished the day with 252 yards, 1 passing touchdown, and an interception on the day. But again, so it wasn't horrible, but there were just instances in that Pittsburgh game where, like we mentioned, the Patriots offensive line gave them time after time after time after time. They did not allow a sack. There are a couple instances where you thought maybe this might happen. Maybe there might be a sack here, but that didn't come to fruition. And they kept the pocket pretty clean. So that's where, especially on that Devontae Parker one down the seam, it's just that's where it was just frustrating, because you had the time. And yes, does he have the best deep ball? No. It says you have a pea shooter like Rex Ryan said. No, it's not a pea shooter, for Christ's sake. That's totally incomplete. That'd be guys like Teddy Bridgewater who have pea shooters. But it was frustrating, though. There were some times where he just made some head scratching decisions, and there were a couple other times where you thought, "Ooh, maybe this might get picked off here." Specifically, a play to Minkah Fitzpatrick where I thought this was going to be picked off by Mac, but luckily nothing came of it. So it wasn't his worst game, but it wasn't his cleanest game either. There's a lot to kind of clean up there from Mac. And again, I think this is where having Matt Patricia, who is inexperienced at play calling, and it hasn't been, listen, I thought there might be times where this could be a complete disaster. Now, Miami had some times where you're really scratching your head, but it hasn't like completely fallen off the wagon. And Pittsburgh, they settled it down. But again, it's so vanilla, this offense right now. There's no real window dressings here to kind of get the other team to think about, all right, are they setting us up here? What are they setting up for later on? No, it seems like we have our set running plays. We have our set passing games where with Mac Jones, he's advanced as far as the mental capacity as far as for quarterbacks are concerned. So you don't have to worry about Mac Jones having to dumb it down for Mac. I think this is more you're dumbing it down for the coaching staff who's taken this over. So this is where it kind of hurts Mac Jones, is that you're not putting his full skill set out there. And yes, I know that Mac Jones, once you get out there, you can run the show. It's not like they're saying, no, you can't audible or anything, or you can't make changes out there. But still, when you're dumbing this offense down because your coaching staff needs it, and more, I guess if you want to say, try to make it a little bit more user-friendly than it has been in the past, sure, you can make it more user-friendly, but you still don't have to dumb it down to this extent. So I think this is where this is hurting Mac Jones, is that you're having such a vanilla offense at this point in time, where you're not giving him the best opportunity in this situation. And that's just what's frustrating me here, is just how vanilla that it's looked. And yes, do you have a Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, a Stephon Diggs out there? Do you have that true number one wide receiver where maybe you could afford to spice things up? No, you don't have that, but you have a decent complement of wide receivers, Dan Orlovsky. And normally I like Dan Orlovsky's comments, but if you haven't heard, like, he was on WEEI and brought up that the Patriots have 3s and 4s No, I know. I've told you in the past they have 2s and 3s. So are we quibbling a little bit here? Maybe, but I don't think they're 4s because 4s are really very spotty wide receivers. Those are guys that shouldn't be starting on your team. Those are guys that barely make NFL squads. I don't think that's the case because Jacoby Myers is a very solid possession wide receiver. Devontae Parker's shown he's been a 1,200-yard receiver. It's just been an issue of him staying healthy and the team being willing to open up the playbook and pass like they weren't down in Miami, except for a few occasions. Now is Devontae Parker this great receiver, this Hall of Fame receiver? No, but I think he's a solid wide receiver that you can trust in. But just kind of taking a sidecar here to Devontae Parker, that's kind of what worries me here is that Devontae Parker seems to be getting force fed for very little to gain out of this. He has 1 reception for 9 yards, and that was in the opener against Miami. And then on the 4 targets that he's had, there's been 2 interceptions on half of his targets that he's had. So it's just been frustrating to watch. Now he's been out there a lot, and I think this kind of has to do with going back. If you forget that Matt Patricia, before he not that it's official because Belichick won't, because he's trying to make sure that Matt Patricia still gets his head coaching money from the Lions. Because remember, as soon as you take a coordinator's job, then your old contract becomes null and void as far as the other team having to pay it. So Matt Patricia supposedly was the one that made the trade to get Devontae Parker over to the Patriots. So he's kind of like his binky, I guess, if you want to put it that way. So you have Devontae Parker being out there for, what was it, 89% of the offensive snaps, 94% of the offensive snaps. It was a lot of offensive snaps that he was out there for. But again, his usage has been down as far as actually getting targeted. And 2 of the 4 times it's been picked off. Now, one of those should have been an offensive pass interference. So that should have been wiped away. But again, the one you can't excuse is the one that Mack threw down the seam, and that ball did not go in that same direction. Now, maybe there's a little bit of communication, but that's just frustrating as well, that you're not seeing Devontae Parker come in here, at least in the first couple of weeks, and maybe open things up as a little bit here for the Patriots. Now, obviously, he doesn't have the breakaway speed, but at least kind of open it from the standpoint of this is a target monster that you're going to really have to gang up on, and then open it up for guys like Kendrick Bourne and Jacoby Myers out there for the Patriots. So we'll see how that shapes up with Devontae Parker here. But overall, though, I mean, I don't 100% agree with what Orlovsky said. There are parts of it that I'm not going to fight him on, obviously, because you don't have that playmaker. You don't have a Justin Jefferson, Stephon Diggs, Cooper Kupp. You don't have those type of guys that obviously that you can just lean on when you need that first down, when you need a big touchdown in the game, when it's 3rd and long. You don't have those type of guys, at least at this moment. Who knows when Tyquan Thornton comes back in 4 to 6 weeks? Because of the original injury, they said 6 to 8 weeks. So now that we're past 2, so hopefully somewhere a week or 2 before Halloween, or right around Halloween, we get him back and we can see what we have moving forward from there. But still, when it comes to this receiving core, yeah, you don't have that big time wide receiver, but you have solid professional wide receivers. Obviously, I'm not going to put them in it like in the top 10, top 12 groups, but this is a group that I'm not like ashamed to say, oh, this Patriots wide receiver group is just awful. No, but I'm not going to put them up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers when they're healthy, the Rams or the Vikings or the Bengals, those type of teams. But we're not talking about a bunch of guys that are inept. We saw Kendrick Bourne take strides. This is a guy that, for some reason, was in Patricia's doghouse. And this is a guy last year for 50 plus receptions, had 800 yards on the nose, 5 receiving touchdowns. This is a guy that was on the rise. And he's last week, there was a good point that he did. He was in there for what, 23 to 30 snap plays in this game. So he was out there a lot. And he didn't make a gigantic impact, but he did make some good, nice catches, get some nice first downs. So this is where I think that you're going to have to utilize Kendrick Bourne more, because he's the one, now that you don't have Tyquan Thornton, who is your speed merchant out there. And remember, he will be, as long as everything health-wise with that shoulder works out, he'll be back. But until then, he's your fastest wide receiver that you have out there. He's going to get the separation. And if that's where you kind of need to scheme things up for him, get the ball in his hands, make the defense think about his speed, so that you have guys like Jacoby Myers and hopefully Devontae Parker out there that can start to make impact plays. And once you get into the red zone, you have a guy like Devontae Parker that can be effective along with those tight ends. So hopefully that all works out here for the Patriots in that standpoint. This is where it's not the best receiving group, but it's by far not the worst that's out there in the league. So there are obvious things that this team has to work on, and we all know that they can fall back on the run game, which that again looked pretty solid this last week, because surprisingly, Damian Harris has been the more effective running back for this team, because I honestly thought that this would be the Ramondre Stevenson show. Not that it was going to be 100% that it was going to be 70-30% Ramondre Stevenson in this go around. But I did think that maybe you would see a more heavier use, maybe like a 60-40 or a 55-57% snap share there for Ramondre as like the lead back. But Damian Harris does go for 15 rushes for 71 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 catches for 16 yards. So what, you got a total there of 87 yards total for Damian Harris. And then, of course, with Ramondre Stevenson, he ended up rushing for nine attempts for 47 yards, 1 catch for 4 yards. So again, over 50 total scrimmage yards there as well. So we're looking at over 120 some odd yards from scrimmage from the Patriots running back. So that's a pretty solid day. So like I said, the old faithful is going to be there with Damian Harris and Ramondre Stevenson. And again, I still want to see Ramondre get involved more, especially passing game wise. So this is where I think the Patriots need to open it up, use Kendrick Bourne more, use that speed more, and you're always going to have that running game to fall back on, who, again, because of how the line looked against Pittsburgh, I think they stabilize things here. So I'm not going to say that they're going to be in any great shape to face like the Green Bay defenses or the Buffalo defenses later on the year. That's still to be seen with those elite defenses. But they've started to stabilize this offense. They really have. I think they truly have. Against Pittsburgh, I know people are going to be like, that Pittsburgh team almost lost to an 0-2 Bengals team that's been disappointing this year. The Pittsburgh's in disarray. Yes, but still, there's talent that's over on that Pittsburgh defense, and as far as that front seven and Cam Hayward, who has a history of wreaking havoc from that defensive line. So it's Pittsburgh still has some playmakers over there on defense, but yet they weren't able to get any pressure on Mac. So if this can continue, I feel more confident about the Patriots moving forward as far as offensively, because just after the preseason and after game 1, things just weren't looking great for that offensive line. And that's what really had me worried, because you're going to get Matt killed that way. How are you going to run the ball? But at least for 1 week in Pittsburgh, it feels as though they might have stabilized this, and you might have something moving forward where you feel better about where, okay, maybe we can get back to running the ball and then continue to grow Mac in this situation. So that's so again, it wasn't Mac's best game, but they were able to pull this win out here. And I hate to sound like I keep harping on some of the negatives of this game, but they were able to get the win. They gutted it out. You were kind of hoping maybe they could win by a touchdown or more. But again, remember, this is a team that's going to have to gut out a lot of these victories here. They're going to rely on that defense, who again looked pretty solid. Yes, you can tell me that it's Mitch Trubisky, but again, remember, they do have really good skill players out there in Deontay Johnson, not Kenny Pickens, yeah, George Pickens, Chase Claypool, and of course, you have Harris, Najee Harris in the backfield, who, yes, he was dealing with a foot injury, but he's one of the better young backs. So there are pieces there that obviously, even with a quarterback of Mitch Trubisky's lack of skill set, that if you have a slip up with talent like that, that they might be able to take advantage, that Mitch Trubisky should be able to take advantage of that. But they were able to still play pretty solid. So obviously they're going to have their hands full up against this next opponent that they're going to have to face, and that's going to be the Baltimore Ravens, who we talked about a little bit in the opening of the show, had a major gut punch against the Miami Dolphins, who just ripped their heart out. They ended up getting beat. What was it? 43-38 in that game. It was just, that was a gut punch if you're the Ravens and a Ravens fan, because you thought you had that game won going into the fourth quarter. You were up 35-14 when I had flipped that game on after the Pats were done. And man, oh man, that was something. I hate to admit it, because those battles that the Patriots have had over the years with both teams, of course, Baltimore in the playoff hunt and Miami being in your division, really didn't want to see either one of them win. But still, it was a very, very entertaining game, very fun to watch. And Tua had the game of his career, had 466 yards, had 6 touchdowns, just was slinging the ball around. Well, I say slinging the ball around, quote unquote, because of course you just throw that little slant, those little small passes to Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, and you watch them go off to the races. So that you have to be scared of being a Patriots fan. We're just watching Waddle and Tyreek Hill in your division for years to come, because man, that's going to be scary, especially Waddle. Now that you drafted him, he's going to be under the cheap there for you. So it is going to be scary. But nonetheless, it was an entertaining game. But Baltimore's going to come into this game against New England hungry, and of course, Lamar Jackson is back and healthy, as he missed time at the end of last year. Now, this Baltimore team is 1-1 to start the season after they beat the Jets and lost, obviously, last week to Miami. So now the Patriots will look to try to keep things rolling here against Baltimore as well. So it's going to be interesting to see, because the Patriots have had decent success against Baltimore in the Lamar Jackson era. Now, of course, there's the one big the big time loss that they had in 2019, where Lamar Jackson and the Ravens running game just absolutely gashed them on that, what was it, a Monday night game that they had in Tom Brady's last season in 2019. He absolutely just tore them apart. Now, and then going back to 2020, the Patriots played the Ravens, and that game was played in a monsoon, basically, at Foxborough. And surprisingly, the Patriots ended up winning that game against Lamar Jackson and the Ravens. So it's been a mixed bag, but there have been times where Belichick has been able to successfully tamp down Lamar Jackson, keep him, especially in that game in Foxborough. Now you can blame the rain if you want, but still he was able to keep Lamar Jackson somewhat in the pocket. He had his moments, and unlike the 2019 game where it was just looked like the Ravens were out there playing Madden on easy mode, where Lamar Jackson was just slicing and dicing them with his legs, especially. But of course, that's where Belichick forced. And if you go back to that 2020 game where Belichick forced him into passing, where yes, he is a good he's become a pretty solid passer. And now am I going to write home about as far as his accuracy is when it comes to Lamar Jackson? No, he's got a very good arm as far as velocity, but still there's something there to be improved on as far as especially the short game accuracy, and the mid-range accuracy overall. So there are things that he needs to improve, but he's still an elite player in this league, an elite quarterback because of the dual threat ability. But Belichick in that 2020 game was able to at least keep him to a respectable amount of rushing yards there and not really have him blow this game wide open. So, and of course, remember, the Ravens don't have nearly the same running game that they have the last couple times that the Patriots have played the Ravens. And because remember, J.K. Dobbins is still coming back from his torn ACL. Gus Edwards is still out at the moment. The Ravens did just release J.K. Dobbins. Not J.K. Dobbins. I'm sorry. I was thinking of Kenyon Drake. So he's no longer there. So and they had to bring in Davis from the Falcons. So Mike Davis. So it's an interesting kind of view of what they have going on down there with that running game, which that's their bread and butter. Now, obviously, we know a lot of it comes from Lamar Jackson, but still, that's their other piece, because when you have a healthy J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards, those are two pretty good backs that can get you yards there, and they don't have them at this moment. So right now you're just dealing with you have to make sure that you keep Lamar Jackson in the pocket. And this is going to be the first real true test of a running quarterback this year, because you haven't faced Josh. Obviously, they won't get Josh Allen until later on in the season. So that's going to be the one thing that I'm going to be worried about here, because they really haven't been tested with that type of scramble ability, and they haven't had that. They had to face a Pittsburgh team that had a banged up Najee Harris. So this will be the first true test of the season, because you're going to have to keep them in the pocket. And the Ravens have only two options in the passing game. That's Mark Andrews, who is a great elite tight end in this league. And then Rashad Bateman, who is in his second year and has had a few very good, solid games. He got over 100 yards receiving and a touchdown, and thanks to that long bomb late in the game. But you have Rashad Bateman, who's your number one wide receiver. And then after that, you're kind of looking at different pieces. You have Devin Duvernay, who's mainly a return guy, but he's had a few successful games, but nothing really to write home about as far as from the receiving end. It's a lot of his production comes from the kicking game and punt return. So it's really two options. And for me, I'm okay with letting Rashad Bateman get his. For me, it's going to come down to Mark Andrews. And one of the big key things here is that Kyle Duggar, that I forgot to mention, the out of the box segment, left that game due to an injury, and he still hasn't been back at practice yet. So that's going to be one of the big things there, is because it would be nice to have him in the matchup against Mark Andrews. And although Adrian Phillips is also good at covering tight ends. So if you could have both of those guys ready to go to play against Mark Andrews, I would feel a lot better. But yeah, Kyle Duggar, I feel that physicality against Mark Andrews would really, really help. So that'll be something interesting to see. So how Belichick, if he doesn't have Kyle Duggar, how he brackets or decides to play against Mark Andrews. Now, of course, defensively, we're not talking about the same Baltimore Ravens team that has been in the history of their franchise. This is a team that's dealing with a lot of injuries, especially to their secondary. So, do I think the Patriots are all of a sudden just going to go up and put 50 burger, 40 points up on Baltimore? No, you're going to have to grind it out still. But this is I feel better about this offense actually, maybe than I did going against Miami, and probably about where I felt with Pittsburgh, or maybe a little better just because this Baltimore team is banged up on the defensive side of the ball. So you're going to have to. This is where you might see a tiny bit of explosion here from the Patriots. When I say tiny, maybe you get to 28 points in this game, but this is going to be a hard one here for the Patriots, because I think Baltimore right now, they were able to put 35 up against that Miami team, and you do have a really good you have a really good dual threat quarterback in Lamar Jackson, and you have a good young tight end there in Mark Andrews. So I'm a little worried here, more from the standpoint of the Patriots struggling at times against those rushing quarterbacks for the most part. And this is where if my pick for the week is probably going to end up being Baltimore in this one, where I say 28-21. And unfortunately, the Patriots in this one, I think, end up losing this one to the Baltimore Ravens and losing their home opener. But I think that this is going to be more competitive than some people thought, because you're going to get those people out there that just think the Patriots are absolute trash right now, that everything is kind of sinking in. And then you have Baltimore, who a lot of people, because of Lamar Jackson, he's kind of been one of their, outside of the Buffalo, Kansas City, and the Cincinnati teams, they're like the fourth team that you kind of hear people possibly might go to the Super Bowl. But to me, Baltimore is kind of sneakily in that same position that the Patriots are, because you have a quarterback, and remember, he hasn't signed his contract, a long-term extension, because this is his last year. It could be in Baltimore unless they come to a contract decision. But Baltimore's kind of in that spot where, all right, we have a quarterback, we're trying to lock him up. We have Rashad Bateman, but nothing really after that as far as the receiving core. You have Mark Andrews, but it's kind of spare parts after that. Of course, I would take Mark Andrews any day of the week for at a tight end with the Patriots. But you're kind of in the same spot where you're trying to rebuild, you're trying to compete at the same time, and and defensively, it's not the same defense that we've seen in the past from Baltimore, kind of like what we've seen with the Patriots, where they're trying to rebuild their core. Although I kind of feel actually better about what the Patriots have defensively, especially on that front seven, when you have when you end up having Christian Barmore and Devon Godchow, and you have the former Raven himself in Matthew Judon. I actually feel better about what the Patriots have going on here. So it'll be interesting to see how this works out, but I don't think it's going to be a total blowout like some people think. And I think this is where the Patriots end up taking this game. I'm sorry, but I think the Ravens, end up just squeaking out a victory here, 28-21 against the Patriots. So at least in this scenario, I'd have the Patriots falling back to 1-2 to start the season, with a matchup against Aaron Rodgers and the Packers looming in week 4. Of course, we'll talk about that more next week, after we break down this week 3 game against the Baltimore Ravens. So, but that's my prediction going into this coming week here for your Patriots. Now, of course, we did mention that we'd talk a tiny bit of baseball here, because there has been a little bit of news as far as the Red Sox. As we mentioned, Kevin Plawecki was let go from the Boston Red Sox earlier this week, and after their last home game. And of course, there was reaction coming down from Nathan Eovaldi. He was not happy. He talked about that after his locker. Now, of course, they were blaring "Dancing on My Own," which was Plawecki's walk-up song, who he introduced that to the team last year in the postseason. So that was kind of their tribute, their goodbye to Kevin Plawecki. Now, of course, there was a little bit of question there from Nathan Eovaldi, at least in the post game, and then with an interview with Rob Bradford, basically about about maybe some of the questioning the Red Sox direction, if you will. But again, then they kind of came back out around today and kind of clarified some of it and kind of did the mea culpa, probably after talking with probably some of the front office and Alex Cora. And he kind of, the tune changed a little bit. Still, it wasn't completely like blowing smoke. So there was probably a little bit of turnaround there, because I think he still wants to come back to this place in the offseason, because obviously they're going to need to sign some veteran pitchers and try to revamp this pitching staff, because you have to plan as though you don't have Chris Sale, even if he comes back, even when he comes back next year. Just build that staff and count Chris Sale as an extra. But what this whole Kevin Plawecki thing kind of tosses up, what it kind of stirs up, if you will, is the direction of this team kind of heading into the offseason, and are you comfortable with what Hein Bloom has, or if he'll be able to run this team correctly and get this team back, which that's where I have my doubts. Obviously, I feel like the ownership group wants to win. I feel like they do. Not that Hein Bloom doesn't want to win, but as far as going in the right direction, going in, not possibly all in, but being willing to make those big moves, and not just to make the headlines, but I'm talking about making sure that you get a power hitting out, not just some schlub that hits 211 that hits 30 home runs. I'm talking about you need to get a middle of the order bat in that outfield to complement Rafael Devers, and if you bring back Xander Bogaerts, make that the case, which that those are the other two that we'll get to hear in just a second. But you have to go out, get the power hitting outfielder. Now, I don't know if that's going to be Aaron Judge, because that's really pie in the sky, because I have a feeling he's not going to leave the city of New York, whether that's the Yankees or the Mets. But if you're third in line in this situation, and if you feel you have an actual shot, maybe go out and sign Aaron Judge and bring him into town. But of course, you have to go out, find a power bat for the outfield. You have to revamp this pitching staff all the way from the starting rotation. Of course, I think we've seen some really good things out of Brian Bayo. He had a rough first to 2 or 3, maybe even 4 starts when he first came up. Of course, you could see the stuff was there. He throws that hard 98 mile-an-hour fastball and the hard sinker there as well, which gets up to like 96, 97. He's got and the changeup is amazing. That's the Bugs Bunny changeup he's got. I'm not going to say Pedro, because I don't want to do that to him, because we all know what plane Pedro was on. What a once in a lifetime player he was. But Brian Bayo has that nice changeup. So I think this is a guy in Brian Bayo that I'm comfortable with throwing him into the rotation next year. And then, of course, if you can bring Nathan Eovaldi back, you have Nick Pivetta. This is where I think I'd like them to go out and get Carlos Rendon, the former White Sox and San Francisco Giant, in the offseason, and bring him in, because it sounds like he's going to opt out of his second year of his deal that he had with the Giants. So you bring Rendon here on like a 3-year deal, 4-year deal, because he would be a nice front end of the rotation starter. Because obviously it sounds like DeGrom's going to opt out, but more or less to get more money. I don't think he's going to leave the Mets. I mean, obviously, if he left the Mets, then I'm backing up the Brinks truck to Jacob DeGrom, who is an utter stud. He's so good, so good. That's a guy that I have no problem throwing in the Pedro Martinez, Roger Clemens class of pitchers, the Sandy Koufax, those absolute monsters on the mound. And so if obviously if he wiggled free, I'm backing up the Brinks truck and saying, yep, you come to town. You definitely come to town now. Obviously he's older. What is he? 33 years old. He was a late bloomer, but this is where I'm signing him up. Maybe like a 4 year. Maybe you don't give him that like 10 year. Obviously, you're not giving him a 10-year deal, but you give him a 4 to 5 year deal, and you give him big time money front load it of that contract. So it'll be interesting to see. But again, I know we're kind of getting the wish list here, but my point of this conversation is you have to revamp that rotation along with the guys that you're going to bring back with the Bayos and the Pavettas. So do you bring back an Evaldi? Who else do you go out there and get in free agency? And then obviously your bullpen, you have decisions to make. Are you going to keep Tanner Houck and Garrett Whitlock out there? Are you going to bring Whitlock back into the rotation? So depending on what you decide to do with those two internal options, are you going to go get a full-time closer? And then what are you going to do setup wise if you don't have one of those guys out there? So you have to go out there, really bring in some solid bullpen arms, some good bullpen arms, and then think about first base. Are you ready to put Tristan Cassius up there full time, or maybe do you want to go get a veteran right-handed first baseman now that you have, depending on what Eric Hosmer does? And then, of course, the biggest things, though, the biggest direction that is gonna affect this team is make sure that you bring back Xander Bogaerts. You can't let him walk unless you pissed him off so much that he doesn't want to come back, no matter even if you offered him $500 million for like 1 year. But if he's still willing to talk and still willing to come back, then you got to bring back Xander Bogaerts. And I don't think you're going to have to pay him over $30 million. But I think if you give him in the $25, $27 million range, I think you're going to, for 5 years, I think you'd have an opportunity bringing him back. And then, of course, the biggest of them all is going to be make sure Rafael Devers is locked up long term. So give him, this is one of those rare players where, yeah, give him a 10-year deal and I'm fine. And I'm totally fine with that because he's 25, 26 years old. So if he's 25, by the end of that 10 year, it'll be 35. And if all he does is hit for and you're paying him to hit. Now he's improved defensively, but you're paying him to be that slugger. So as long as he continues to be that slugger and all around great hitter that he is, because remember he can hit 300. Over 300. So we're talking about an all-around great hitter that has tremendous power. So you got to make sure that you lock him up and you bring him back here full long term to this franchise. So to me, I just have my doubts about Chaim Bloom because it's the Rafael Devers, Xander Bogaerts piece of this that I'm definitely scared about. He has spent money to bring in Trevor Story. So I'm not saying he won't spend money, but it's spending it on the right people. And for some reason, when it comes to some of those homegrown guys, it just seems like Chaim Bloom is a little hesitant. So I don't want to see them go and overcorrect the market and you lose Rafael Devers, so you go blow money on somebody else. I'd rather them, instead of going out and making up for not signing Rafael Devers, that they go and give Aaron Judge $500 million. And then they decide to just, after this year, just let Devers walk or they trade him. I don't want to see that. He's too good of a hitter. He's a top 10 to top 5 hitter in this league. And you can't let him walk out the door. This is where you got to bite your lip and just give him all the money that he wants, because he's well worth it. So this is just where I don't feel comfortable with Chaim Bloom. It's just the homegrown players that I just am scared what he's going to do with. And of course, he's made the comments that on air that he's more upset that he didn't get those guys like the Yankees closer, Clay Holmes, Like those are the that came from Pittsburgh. Those are the type of guys that he said keeps him up at night, are some of those diamonds in the rough players. Well, dude, you're the GM in Boston. You have all the resources and things in the world. How about you do what the Dodgers and the Yankees have done over these last 5 years? And I know you've won a World Series in 2018, so I know you have that to hold over the Yankees' head. But from the standpoint for me, is that those big time markets, like the big time teams like the Dodgers and Yankees, they're willing to spend the big time money, but also draft and develop their own guys and then supplement the rosters, which for some reason the Red Sox just they don't want to bring in the premium outside pieces. They'll go bargain bin shopping, but unlike the Dodgers and Yankees, they're outside of Trevor Story. They're really haven't gone out there and been like, okay, I'm going to go get the top tier pitching guy. I'm going to go out there and get the top tier outfielder. So it's just I don't feel confident when it comes to Chaim Bloom as far as what he's going to do for the Red Sox in the offseason. So we're going to be my fingers are going to be so crossed that are going to be crossed all offseason long until I hear the good news, if there is any, about Bogarts and, of course, Rafael Devers. So that'll be very interesting as we go into the MLB offseason. Of course, I'm like I said, I'm going to be on. I'm going to be on Xander Bogarts and Rafael Devers watch, because those are the two guys that I'm going to be so pissed off if, for whatever reason, neither of them come back, because those are your stars. Those are your studs that you have for hopefully for a long time in this situation. So as we look towards the end of the show, we'll get into a few quick fire segments here as we're going to get into our one big bet segment here as we look at the slate of games. And this is not the best week, if we're going to be completely honest here, if we're being honest with ourselves, because there hasn't been the one game that I've looked at that I'm like, okay, this is the one that I really feel great about with taking this team over that team. Now, if I was going to put my money down, if you were forcing me to put my money down on one of these games, I am actually going to take the Packers and Buccaneers game. That's going to be the one game that I'm taking here. I'm taking the Packers plus 105 and taking the under in this game, which is under 41.5 points. So this is a game where I feel pretty good about the Packers, more from the standpoint that Tom Brady doesn't have Chris Godwin. Mike Evans has been suspended for one game because of his fight with Marshawn Lattimore. And then even though Aaron Rodgers hasn't exactly lit the world on fire, as far as he only has the 2 passing touchdowns over the first 2 games, which is very pedestrian for Rodgers, you have 2 great weapons in the backfield in Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon. So I think this is where, with those 2 running backs, and then, of course, if Aaron Rodgers can get something out of Allen Lazard, and Sammy Watkins actually last week had 93 receiving yards. So this is where I think that banged up Buccaneers team is kind of ripe for the picking, at least for this week. And once they start getting healthy, obviously, like, I picked him as my Super Bowl representative in the NFC. But once they get healthy, it'd be a different story. But right now, I think this is where the Buccaneers are favored because they're the home team. You have Tom Brady, and the defense is still very good. But this is where I think Aaron Rodgers comes on the road and steals a win here away from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So for this one, I'm going to go with the the Green Bay Packers over the Buccaneers and take that under. And that would be a nice payday here for you. So if you bet the Bucs, and if you bet the Packers and the under, and you throw down $20, you're looking at a payout of $78.27 as far as that Packers game. So again, I feel pretty good about that. I feel pretty good about that one just because of the injuries that the Buccaneers are dealing with, especially on offense. So I think even though the Bucs have a stout run defense, these are going to be the first real challenge here for as far as that running wise, because remember that week 1 game that they played the Saints in, Alvin Kamara was dealing with some rib injury, so they didn't use him a lot. Obviously, he's a top 5, top 7 running back in the game, so that's obviously he obviously wasn't 100% that first game, or excuse me, last week in week number 2. Sorry, my apologies. But I feel pretty good about that game. Now, as you mentioned, we will head over to the fantasy world, and this time it's going to be the fantasy panic. So this segment, obviously, as you can tell, very obvious, is should you panic about any of these superstars or any of these big time players out there that have just absolutely struggled in the first couple weeks here? And we'll start things off at quarterback. Now, at quarterback, it's going to be Joe Burrow. Now, Joe Burrow obviously had a very good season last year, could have been in that MVP race, but he is struggling right now. An 0-2 start to the season for the Bengals, and Joe Burrow, he had a decent week 1 as far as if you look at statistically. He had 338 yards passing, 2 touchdowns. And if you're in a PPR league, had 24 points, but it was those 4 interceptions that cost him, that really cost you. Last week against the Cowboys, only had 199 yards passing and 1 touchdown. And this is one that I'm not full blown panic, but I'm in pretty decent sized panic, just from the standpoint that you're not dealing with a lot of injuries. You went up against a Dallas team that they have a pretty good defense, but again, this is a team that I thought defensively for Dallas would be worn out because you don't have Dak Prescott. You are relying on the running game at this point because you have to rely on Cooper Rush. But that wasn't the case, as the Cowboys were able to kind of control the clock and the time of possession in this particular game. So this was a game where I thought that he'd be able to come out there and play pretty well. And that first game, though, that's the one that kind of worries me there, because you ended up, yes, I know it was week 1, but against the Steelers defense that I'm not high on, had 4 interceptions. So this is one of those ones where I'm mildly panicked about Joe Burrow at this time. So if you have, luckily he has the Jets coming up. So this is where I think you can still afford to start him, but he does have Miami and Baltimore coming up. So those are 2 rough games that are going to be on the schedule for Joe Burrow. Now, of course, we know that he has the pedigree of being in the Super Bowl. He had a great year last year, so it's not like a guy that can't snap out of it, but I'm mildly panicked at this point in time when it comes to Joe Burrow. Now, running back wise, this is one that is a little surprising as we head into week 3, and that's going to be old friend Derrick Henry. Now, Derrick Henry only has a total of 107 yards rushing and 1 touchdown, no receptions after 2 weeks. Now, for some games for Derrick Henry in his career, 100 and 107 yards rushing with 1 touchdown is what he's had at halftime in some of his career games. Now, obviously, he got hurt last year, but he was on pace to have another monster year last year. And remember, he ended up having almost 1,000 yards before going down. And what was that, in late October? What it was? Mid to late October. So he was on pace to have another monster year. But Derrick Henry, so far this year, first game, 21 rushes, 82 yards, 1 target, no catches. Last week, now obviously there's a little bit of game script to go with this too, but still, word is that he's started to catch the ball a little bit more, and that's going to be Derrick. And Derrick Henry had a rough game against the Buffalo Bills. 13 rushes, 25 yards, 1 touchdown, not even a target. So the man scored, if you're in a PPR league, 16.7 points in 2 weeks. That's an average game. A below average game for Derrick Henry most weeks, as far as what he's gotten over 2. So that's where the panic button. I'm lukewarm on this one here, because of course I wasn't the one that was like, oh, the age is going to catch up to Derrick Henry. I never thought that, but I just thought maybe the usage might, when that usage is going to catch up to him. And you played the Giants and you only lost 20-21. And that's the game where he did have the 82 yards, but that's a game where I was expecting him to dominate. And of course, then now you have to face the Vegas Raiders and this Tennessee. And I think this is going to have a little bit more to do with the team around him, because now Derrick Henry might be caught in a situation where over the last 3-4 years, Tennessee has been the team to beat in that division. They've had a good team. Last year, they were the number 1 seed in the AFC. And they've always been ahead. They've always been able to run the ball. But this is a situation now where last week, Buffalo absolutely blew doors off of them, 141-7. It was a laugher at halftime. They go to face the Raiders, who obviously now have Devontae Adams. I know the Raiders have had their own problems lately. They blew a big lead to the Cardinals, but still, this is a team in Vegas that I like their offensive firepower. Obviously, Tennessee has the advantage at running back, but quarterback, I'm definitely giving it to Derek Carr. And then obviously wide receiver, you have Devontae Adams, who is always in the discussion for the best receiver in the game. At worst, he's third, fourth on the list. Then you have Darren Waller and Hunter Renfrow in the slot. So those weapons are so good. I mean, defensively, neither team scares me, but this is a situation where I think the Tennessee Titans are going to be in a situation where they're going to be forced to kind of pass more. They're going to be behind, which is not ideal for Derrick Henry, just because I know there's been talk about him trying to learn how to not learn, but to become a better pass catcher. But I mean, if he goes from maybe catching a couple balls a game or a ball a game, and he goes up to 5, I mean, yeah, that's good. But unless he's getting yards, I mean, obviously we know he can get yards out the catch, but if he's not a high volume target there, then he's losing a little bit of that kind of oomph that he has, that he's more the power back. So we'll see how that goes. But that's kind of concerning. And again, it's more because of the situation where I don't like what this direction Tennessee's going in. They're 0-2 start the season, and it does. And I've never been a big Tannehill fan, and now he's starting to really kind of feels like the roses off the bloom on this one. Now, this one kind of hits a little close to home for me as far as panic meter with this next wide receiver, and that's Darnell Mooney. I have him in my keeper league, and I mean, I didn't choose to keep him. It was for me, it was Justin Jefferson, Alvin Kamara, and George Kittle. Different story, whatever. Talk about that a different day. but in my keeper league, and I know I have him in a couple other leagues, but Darnell Mooney, man, this one is legitimate panic for me. And again, this is kind of like the Derrick Henry situation where the team is really screwing him over hardcore in this one. Now, Darnell Mooney is a guy last year had pretty good chemistry with Justin Fields, had over 1,100 yards and had 5 touchdowns. So the talent's there. He's a pretty good wide receiver. He's just absolutely getting hosed by a piss poor offense. Just look at this. Just think about this. Justin Fields in 2 games has only attempted, not completed, attempted 28 passes. Cooper Kupp has caught 29. Think about that. Or not caught 29, but targeted 29 times. Just think about that. One receiver's been targeted 25 times. The other team hasn't even attempted more than 28 passes in a game. And Darnell Mooney has caught 2 balls. The first game, caught 1 for 8 yards. Game 2, caught 1 ball for negative 4 yards. Now, the tough part here is, yes, it's panic because the offense just looks putrid. Justin Fields, I think he's getting a little screwed in the system, but again, he's still culpable in this. It's just the offense is putrid. It's putrid. Now, this is where, because of the talent of Darnell Mooney, don't drop him. Don't do it. Don't drop him, and because I think this is where we saw flashes of it last year. We saw where he had chemistry with Justin Fields. It's there. We know it's there. It's just for some reason this Chicago offense is just and again, I wasn't taking Darnell Mooney to be like a top 20 fantasy wide receiver. This is a guy that I took him to be like my number 3 or a flex. And I've gotten burned both weeks with Darnell Mooney, and I'm not ready to entirely give up as far as just cutting him from my team, because I know it's there and I know those explosions can come from Darnell Mooney. It's just a matter of Chicago finally firing up the pass game. And I know people want to go, oh, they're playing the Texans this week. This should be a nice get right matchup. Yeah, but the Texans have been a little feisty here the last couple of weeks. So unless you're entirely desperate at the position, you have nothing else there, then you need to sit him. Don't dump him. Don't cut him. Don't put him out on waivers, but sit him on your bench. Wait a couple weeks, see if Chicago finally starts to toss the ball around and they get into Mooney's hands. And if that's the case, then you can then if you see a couple consistent weeks, then slide him back in, but just don't dump him from the roster. That wouldn't be the best thing to do, because I have a feeling we're all pissed off right now, but I have a feeling that they're going to finally get the ball into Mooney's hands. I mean, he's too good of a player for them not to get the ball in his hands, because we're not talking about some older wide receiver here. We're talking about a pretty young wide receiver that, even in a bad offense last year where Allen Robinson was complaining and wasn't producing, where it was still a bad offense, we saw Darnell Mooney thrive last year. So I still think it's in there, but just if you can afford to, put him on your bench. If you have a guy maybe like Garrett Wilson that you picked up this week, Curtis Samuel, Jahad Dotson, put those guys in there. So that's your fantasy panic meter. So again, remember, we're low on the panic scale for Joe Burrow. We're lukewarm when it comes to Derrick Henry, because it's still Derrick Henry. It's more the game script that's going to come up here, because I just don't feel comfortable with the Titans right now. And then with Darnell Mooney, it is full-scale panic, because this offense is so bad in Chicago that you just don't know what to expect. All right, folks, that will wrap things up for this week's episode. And remember to join us next week as we will break down this Patriots-Ravens game. as well as get you set for the Patriots and Packers for week number 4. And of course, if anything else news-wise happens with the Red Sox, Patriots, or Bruins, we will definitely keep you up to date, let you know what's happening from that standpoint. And of course, you, as always, every Wednesday night, if you want to watch the live stream, you can always make sure to show up at 8 o'clock and we'll get you everything you need to know about Boston sports. And if you have any questions, you're always welcome to put them in the live stream comment section. Remember, you can like and subscribe to the show here on YouTube, get your notifications as well. And of course, you can always, if you can't make it to the live stream, go out and subscribe and listen to the podcast on Spotify or on SoundCloud. Just search New England Sports Weekly and you'll be able to find it there. And of course, you can follow us on the socials at NE Sports Weekly on Twitter. Send me any questions you got there. And of course, if you can't find it there, just send it to my personal at Sean_Met28. That's for Twitter and for Instagram. All right, everybody. Well, you enjoy the rest of your evening or the rest of your day, and we will see you next week.